Hi everyone. This is V Multi. In this tutorial I will explain how I created the pumpkin moon in my Halloween scene. This tutorial was created using Photoshop CS5, which is a little old, but you can follow it using newer versions as well. This video was not originally created to make a tutorial. This is actually my workflow, so keep in mind that sometimes I may have done some experimenting to figure out what would work best. Even so, I believe it is relatively easy to follow. So let's get started. Inspired in the Halloween celebrations, the moon will have the shape of a pumpkin, as well as the traditional holes for the mouth and eyes. To do this, we will use 3 different images, one for the pumpkin shape, one for the moon texture and one for the mouth and eyes. In this tutorial, the bottom part of the moon is covered by the ground. But you can either leave it uncovered or use any ground image if you prefer. We should start by duplicating the moon layer to have a backup just in case. To do that, right-click over the layer and choose the option Duplicate Layer. Let's unhide the pumpkin layer and get rid of the white background, shall we? In this case, since the background is white and the pumpkin is orange, we could use the magic wand tool because there's a clear difference between the pumpkin color and the white background. To do this we only need to select the magic wand tool and click over the white background, selecting everything except the pumpkin. However, although this solution is much faster, it's probably not the best because the pumpkin might end up having white artifacts around it. For that reason, we should use the pen tool to create a path around the pumpkin. Using the pen tool is fairly easy. To create new points, click and drag until you have the desired curves. Remember, one of the most important shortcuts, not only in Photoshop but in almost any software, is Ctrl-Z to undo the last action. So every time you make a mistake, just go back one step and correct it. After closing the path, we have to use it to make our selection. To do that, make sure you still have the pen tool or the path selection tool selected, right-click anywhere on the drawing canvas, and then choose the option Make Selection. We will probably need to invert the selection, just press Shift-Ctrl-I. Another way would be to click on the Select button on the top menu and then choose Inverse. When the area is selected, press Delete to clear it. Now, if you're using a ground image on top of the moon layer, you can make it visible to see how it looks. We need to move the moon to the left. With the moon layer selected, select the Move tool, then click and drag over the drawing canvas. This is the pictorial image that I used as inspiration. Feel free to take a look at it. The moon is too big, so we need to scale it down. With the moon layer selected, go to Edit on the top menu and choose Free Transform, then click and drag one of the corner points to change the size of the image. Remember, while changing the size of an image, we should press and hold Shift so that the image keeps the original scale, otherwise it will probably get distorted. If you click and drag over the center of the image, you'll be able to move it. Now, let's do the same with the pumpkin. We have to make sure the size of the pumpkin matches the size of the moon. Don't forget to make duplicates sometimes to have backups in case something goes wrong. Let's desaturate the pumpkin. In the top menu, go to Image and then choose Adjustments, Hue Saturation. Drag the saturation slider to the left. We have to drag the moon layer to the top of the pumpkin layer. The moon is too small right now, so let's scale it up a little bit to cover the entire pumpkin area, except the stalk. Now, we will change the blending mode of the layer, but before that we need to rasterize it. Remember, to rasterize a layer, simply select the brush tool and click over the smart object, it will appear a window, and we just have to click OK. Another way is to right-click on the layer and select Rasterize Layer. After the layer is rasterized, we want to change the blending mode in a way that the texture of the moon will be clearly visible on the pumpkin behind, but without losing some of the pumpkin's properties. This can be tricky, and usually, we have to use the trial and error method until we get a good result. In the top of the Layers panel, there's a drop-down menu where we can choose the blending mode for the selected layer. We have to choose the one that best fits our purpose, so let's just play with this a little bit. I believe the best one is Screen. It's subtle, yet clearly visible. Select the pumpkin layer and then, using the magic wand tool, click over a blank area in the drawing canvas to select everything but the pumpkin. Go back to the moon layer and press delete to cut the unwanted parts. This way the moon texture will have the shape of the pumpkin. Next step is to use the eraser tool to clean some parts of the moon and let the pumpkin visible behind. Choose the eraser tool and the soft round brush. Then, if you're using a graphics tablet, you should turn on tablet pressure controls opacity so you can erase with lesser pressure, hence, less opacity. If you're using a mouse you can just use the Set Eraser Opacity slider to change the opacity. Now, let's start by erasing the stalk so it can be clearly visible on top of the moon. As we get closer to top of the pumpkin we should erase with less pressure. We want to give a smooth transition between the top of the pumpkin and the moon texture. Feel free to erase other parts of the moon where you want the pumpkin to be visible, but do not exceed yourself. Now, it's time to edit the pumpkin's face. Let's turn the pumpkin face layer visible and then hide the ground layer if you have any, so we can see better. Now we need to rasterize the pumpkin face layer. We have to make our selection around the pumpkin's face, so select the pen tool and create your path around it. We don't need to be extremely precise on this one. After closing the path, let's use it to make the selection. To do that, make sure you still have the pen tool or the path selection tool selected, right-click anywhere on the drawing canvas, and then choose the option Make Selection. Press Ctrl-Shift-I to invert the selection if needed, and then press Delete to clear it. Let's desaturate the pumpkin's face. In the top menu, go to Image. Then choose Adjustments. View Saturation. Drag the saturation slider to the left. The pumpkin's face is way too big. We have to scale it down to fit the moon. Every time we find artifacts roaming around for any reason, we just need to use the rectangular marquee tool to select them and then press Delete to clean it. So let's just scale down the pumpkin's face and move it over the moon. Unhide the ground layer just to see if it is covering the mouth. If that's the case, then we should move the pumpkin's face layer up a little bit. After that, hide the ground layer. Again, if you are not using any ground image, just forget this step. Once again, we have to play with the blending mode, but this time, with the pumpkin's face layer. It is important to have an idea of how the face should look like when it is placed on the moon. The first question we should ask would be, do we prefer to have darkness coming out of the mouth and eyes of the moon? Or we'd rather have light? In this case, I think light is more suitable because the purpose of the moon is precisely to illuminate the night, hence, having light coming out of the moon's mouth and eyes would give the feeling that the core of the moon is light. However, darkness would probably give the moon a darker, maybe creepiest look. Now, before we start playing with the blending mode, we should use the pen tool to create a path around the mouth and eyes of the pumpkin so we can delete what we don't need. Feel free to duplicate the layer to have a backup if you feel like it. Then, select the pen tool and create a path around the mouth, another path around the left eye, and a third path around the right eye. After closing the last path, make the selection. Once again, with the pen tool still selected, right-click anywhere on the drawing canvas and then choose the option Make Selection. After this we will probably need to press Shift-Ctrl-I to invert the selection. Another way would be to click on the Select button on the top menu and then choose Inverse. Press Delete to clear everything but the mouth and the eyes. Now, to use the blending mode in this layer like we intend to, we first have to give the eyes and mouth much more brightness and contrast. To do it, go to the top menu. Image. Adjustments. Brightness Contrast. Meanwhile, let's go to the moon's layer and lower the opacity to 70%. After that, let's just get back to the face layer and duplicate it. From the two layers, turn the one in the bottom invisible and select the top layer to change the blending mode to lighten. After that, we have to play with the brightness and contrast. It's better to do this while in lighten blending mode to see the effects take place. We should try to reach a good balance. It's important to clearly see the light coming out of the mouth and eyes, but not too much. Now let's select the face layer on the bottom, turn it visible, and then change the blending mode to exclusion. Duplicate the layer to create a backup just in case, because now we're going to erase this one. So let's select the eraser with a soft round brush and gently erase the visible shadow around the mouth where it makes sense, especially in the teeth. If you're using a graphics tablet, turn on the tablet pressure controls opacity. If you're using a mouse, use the eraser opacity slider to set the desired opacity. Also, feel free to change the size of the brush whenever is needed. After we're done, let's set the layer's opacity to 80%. Let's select the face layer on top and clean any unwanted things. For example, if you notice, in the mouth, there's some weird pattern that probably has to do with the lighting device that people put inside the pumpkin in the original photo. Cleaning this is fairly easy. Select the clone stamp tool. Put the mouse over some area that is clean, press and hold Alt key, and then click over that area. Now release the Alt key and paint over that pattern, and you will be copying the area where you first clicked to cover it. Remember that rough brushes will probably get better results. If you're using a ground image, you can unhide it now to see how it looks with the moon. Now we can use some simple glowing effects on the moon to give it a better look. Select the pumpkin layer and add a layer style, then choose outer glow. It will open a small window with the layer style options. In the layer style window, with the outer glow option selected, we have some options available to help us create a good-looking glowing effect. First, let's change the size. By doing so, we'll be able to see the glowing effect around the moon. Then, we should change the color to a light blue which is more close to that of the moon. This looks nice, but it is not enough though. We need a larger glowing. So let's start by duplicating the pumpkin layer, move it down the other one. Then, right-click on the layer and choose Clear Layer Style. This way we will clean the glowing effect from this layer, having it only affecting the layer above. Now, let's hide all the moon layers, except the 2 pumpkin layers. We want to give a solid color to the pumpkin's image that doesn't have any glowing effect, and the easiest way to do this is by once again adding a layer style, but this time, we will choose the color overlay. So click the Add a Layer Style button and choose Color Overlay. The pumpkin will become red because it is the default overlay color, but we want to change it once again to light blue. To do this, click over the red color square in the Layer Style window and then, when we move the mouse over the drawing canvas, we will realize that the eyedropper tool is activated, which means that we can copy the precise color of whatever is below our mouse cursor by clicking over it. Now click over the glow of the other pumpkin layer to get that color for this Layer Style overlay. If it's too dark, just change it a little bit manually. Let's hide the glowing pumpkin layer so we can see better our overlay color. We need to blur this pumpkin. To do this, go to the top menu. Choose Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Then, use the slider to choose the blurriness intended. Remember that this blurred pumpkin will be the glowing of the moon, so we can exaggerate to create a larger glowing. We should unhide now both pumpkin layers to see the glowing effects working together. If it seems too much, we simply need to change the opacity of the outer glow effect on the upper pumpkin layer. The objective is to give it a nice glowing effect that starts strong, but gradually and softly loses strength. When it's finally done, we can unhide all the moon and pumpkin's layers. Let's create a new layer to manually paint some lights. Select the brush tool with a soft round brush and white color. Start painting gently in the eyes and mouth to force the light that's coming out of it. Once again, if you're using a graphics tablet, turn on the tablet pressure control's opacity. If you're using a mouse, use the eraser opacity slider to set the desired opacity. When it's done, give the layer a white outer glow effect by adding a layer style. Now duplicate all the layers except the last blurred pumpkin. The reason why we're duplicating all these layers is because we're going to merge them, and so, by duplicating them, we'll be able to keep some backups. Merge all the duplicated layers. To do that, Select the layers, right-click over them, merge. We can now hide all the backups that we don't need to be visible right now. Select the merged layer and give it a little more brightness. Go to the top menu. Image, Adjustments, Brightness Contrast. Then, give it more brightness and maybe less contrast. That's it. Our pumpkin moon is finished. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video and subscribe the channel if you enjoyed it. If you would like to watch the full Halloween scene tutorial, there's a Patreon page where you can get access to exclusive tutorials. I am currently uploading the entire Halloween scene tutorial divided in videos of 1 hour. The first one is already available and covers the ground, the sky, the pumpkin moon, the clouds and the first tree. See you next time.